한국에 대한 잘못된 정보를 바로 찾는 일, 여러분도 함께 해주세요.
Travel creates new experiences and unforgettable memories. Through landscapes, food, scents, and textures, it awakens and satisfies our senses. The endless joy and inspiration of traveling.
The DP's candidate Lee Jae-myung toured Jeju and the southeastern Gyeongsangnam-do Province today, where he made tailored regional pledges. The PPP's candidate Moon-soo stayed in the capital area, where he met doctors' groups amid the prolonged conflict over medical reform. North Korea fired several cruise missiles into the East Sea this morning, a day after the regime failed to launch a 5,000-ton destroyer, which Kim Jong-un called unforgivable. Israel has allowed some humanitarian aid into Gaza, where the humanitarian crisis is growing, but this has yet to reach those in need, while the Israeli military ramps up its ground operations. It's May 22nd, 8 p.m. in Seoul. This is Newscenter.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. We're now counting down from 12 days to the presidential election. The main Liberal Party contender today toured Jeju and Gyeongsangnam-do Province. There, he addressed policies tailored for the regions. Our Shin Ha-young reports.
Democratic Party presidential candidate Lee Jae-myung wrapped up his Thursday campaign in the city of Yangsan in Gyeongsangnam-do Province, which the DP describes as a city with strong potential to become a global logistics hub, thanks to its location and ability to adapt to changing international conditions. During his speech, he emphasized balanced regional growth.
Now, this is Lee Jae-myung's second visit to Gyeongsangnam-do Province during the official campaign period, and it's been seen as an effort to secure more votes in the region compared to the last presidential election when he lost to former President Yoon with about 37% of the vote.
Before coming to Yangsan, he held a rally on Jeju Island, where he highlighted the importance of wind power and said Jeju should take the lead in renewable energy.
Before long, Jeju Island will become a truly eco-friendly place, powered entirely by clean energy with no reliance on fossil fuels. It's on track to become a leading region and model city for renewable energy in Korea, and we must make that happen.
He also addressed the April 3rd incident where around 30,000 civilian protesters were killed in what the authorities at the time characterized as an anti-communist crackdown. He said that he visits Jeju every year for the April 3rd memorial and hopes to come back next year as president. With Lee's visit to Gyeongsangnam-do Province, attention is now on whether he will meet former President Moon Jae-in during the trip. This comes as Lee is scheduled to visit Bongha village in the city of Gimhae on Friday, where a memorial service will be held to mark the 60th anniversary of former President Roh Moo-hyun's death. The visit is seen as a way to emphasize the party's legacy and rally core supporters. There's a chance Lee and Moon could meet as they did last year when Lee joined Moon and former First Lady Kwon Yang-suk for lunch after the ceremony. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News, Yangsan.
The main Conservative Party contender stayed in the capital area, where he met with different organizations, including doctors' associations, amid the prolonged conflict over medical reform. Earlier in the day, he called for political reform, aiming to reduce the number of lawmakers, among others. Our Kim Do-yeon reports.
Yet another apology from the People Power Party for the actions of the former administration. On Thursday, presidential candidate Moon-soo met with leaders of the medical community, issuing a public apology for the Jun-seok administration's handling of the medical reform despite collective pushback from doctors.
As a responsible cabinet member of the government myself, I sincerely offer an apology. The fact that it's not just one or two doctors, but nearly all of them raising this issue, clearly indicates there is a problem.
Kim clarified that he wasn't taking sides, but emphasized the need for the government to listen to professionals in the field. According to the Doctors Association, Kim pledged to resolve the ongoing medical crisis within the first 6 months of his term. He spent a day meeting with various civil society groups. At a roundtable with the heads of Korea's 5 major business organizations, Kim highlighted his pro-industry record as former Gyeongsangnam-do Province governor. This was also his 4th day in the capital region, meeting organizations and rallying for support. And one of his rallies here was Bucheon City's Sosagu district, his old congressional district, where he served 3 terms until around 20 years ago. This also comes as the capital region is always a key battleground where he needs to expand his support to turn things around before the election day. Meanwhile, Kim also made a surprise morning announcement calling for sweeping political reform.
Will we achieve a second wave of democratization or head toward an authoritarian presidential system? I'm deeply concerned.
His remarks were seen as a warning against a potential power monopoly should Democratic Party frontrunner Jae-myung win, adding to the DP's existing parliamentary majority. Kim's reform pledges include cutting the number of lawmakers from 300 to 270, granting the opposition power to appoint an independent inspector general, raising the threshold for impeachment motions, and shielding the judiciary and investigative bodies from political pressure. His message lands as a DP filed around 30 impeachment motions during Yoon's term, only one of which, against former President Yoon, passed. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Reform Party candidate Jun-seok has firmly rejected a merger with the main Conservative Party candidate, saying it'll be his own name and party on the voting ballots. On Thursday, Lee held an emergency press conference with regard to the People Power Party's so-called love calls to the young candidate, urging him to join hands with Moon-soo to form a stronger conservative ticket. Lee said that his support in national polls hit 10% for the first time and dismissed the idea of a merger as meaningless. He'd announced earlier in the day that he had blocked incoming phone calls for the time being. On his campaign trail, Lee continued to target young voters and centrists in the greater Seoul area. He held a discussion with Cho Won-il, former captain of the Cheonan warship, which was torpedoed by North Korea in 2010. He also continued his campus cafeteria outreach, meeting with students at Inha University. Last week, we covered economic visions the candidates have for the next 5 years when it comes to future growth and trade policies. In this week's focus, we shed light on those related to labor reform and housing, shared by the 3 main contenders. Our economics correspondent Lee Soo-jin has the details.
South Korea's presidential election is just around the corner, and each candidate's economic pledges are drawing increased attention from voters. This week, we look closer at candidates' labor reform and housing pledges. The candidates are aiming to improve labor conditions to win the votes of the many who wish for a better work-life balance. To do so, the 2 frontrunners have proposed a 4.5-day work week. The current standard work week is 5 days, with most full-time workers logging 40 hours from Monday to Friday, with a legal maximum of 52 hours per week. The 5-day workweek was introduced with a 2003 revision to the Labor Standards Act and was fully implemented nationwide by 2011. And now attention is on whether a 4.5 workweek will become a reality this year. So what does each candidate's 4.5 workweek look like? Democratic Party candidate Lee Jae-myung has proposed reducing the standard work week from 40 to 36 hours, cutting Friday afternoons without reducing wages. His proposal also includes incentives for companies to adopt the new schedule and has a long-term goal of eventually transitioning to a 4-day work week.
South Korea's total working hours are too long, about 200 hours more than the OECD average. Longer hours no longer mean higher productivity. Efficiency and creativity are now key.
People Power Party candidate Moon-soo has proposed a 4.5 work week that maintains the current 40-hour work week by distributing working hours across the week. Under this plan, employees work an extra hour from Monday to Thursday and finish earlier on a Friday, creating a shorter workday without cutting total working hours. He has also said that he supports granting exemptions to the 52-hour work week limit for the semiconductor sector.
I will replace the rigid working hours system with a more flexible one, cut corporate and inheritance taxes significantly, and drastically reform regulations to help businesses thrive.
Reform Party candidate Jun-seok has strongly criticized the 4.5-day workweek proposal that reduces working hours without cutting wages, calling it unrealistic. He has instead pledged labor reforms include giving local governments the authority to adjust the minimum wage to revitalize regional economies. And housing is a key issue that all three candidates, as the country's residence crisis has fueled voter concern and also contributed to the country's low birth rate. While they all aim to increase supply, their approaches differ, and here's how. The key theme of Lee Jae-myung's housing proposal is New Town. South Korea's first New Town project from the late 1980s, which includes Bundang and Ilsan, now faces aging infrastructure that he plans to rebuild. He also pledges to cut red tape for Seoul's downtown development and to develop a fourth-generation New Town with more quality public housing. The key theme of Kim's proposal is youth. Kim's 333 Youth Housing Supply Plan offers support for up to 9 years, 3 years after marriage and 3 years each after the first and second child. His proposal also includes supplying 200,000 homes to young adults, newlyweds and families, and more housing for single-person households. The key theme of Lee Jun-seok's proposal is life stages. He plans to increase the supply of 59-meter square homes by promoting the development and building of small unit housing. He pledged to promote high-density urban development and also to citing strong housing demand and proposed housing tax cuts tailored to newlyweds seeking smaller homes, growing families needing more space, and seniors looking to downsize. Though each candidate's vision differs, the emphasis on their economic pledges highlights a critical role the economy plays in this election.
Morgan Stanley has raised South Korea's growth forecast for this year to 1.1%. That is a 0.1 percentage point increase from its previous forecast in April. A report released on Thursday explained that the upward adjustment was made in response to the recent gradual de-escalation of tariff tensions between the U.S. and China and the U.S. announcement of a 90-day reciprocal tariff suspension. The report also anticipates that fiscal policy will emerge as a new growth driver after the snap presidential election next month, predicting a second supplementary budget in the second half of this year. North Korea fired several cruise missiles into the East Sea this morning. This follows the regime failing to launch a new warship the previous day, sparking a rebuke from its leader Kim Jong-un. Our correspondent Kim Jong-soo explains.
South Korea's military confirmed the launch of several unidentified cruise missiles from North Korea on Thursday. The Joint Chiefs of Staff said the missiles were detected at around 9 a.m. from the Sondok area in Gyeongsangnam-do Province on North Korea's east coast. The missile launches came a day after North Korea failed to launch a new 5,000-ton destroyer at the Cheongjin shipyard. State media reported that Kim Jong-un was present during the incident, calling it unforgivable and a blow to the regime's dignity. According to the Rodong-sinmun, the rear sled carrying the destroyer detached prematurely, causing the ship to tilt and preventing the front from releasing, disrupting the launch balance. While North Korea did not specify the extent of the damage, the South Korean military said this.
Given the size and scale, it is expected to be similar to the Traeon vessel, and the ship is currently lying on its side in the sea.
Some analysts believe the missile test could be a response to the negative fallout from the failed naval launch. However, others argue that the launches were likely part of North Korea's routine military exercises, as South Korea had already been tracking signs of missile activity.
While the missile launch may help counter the negative image from the ship failure, it could be part of a broader strategy focused on military training, international negotiations, and military cooperation with Russia.
Analysts believe North Korea's ongoing military demonstrations, including the missile tests and destroyer construction, may be part of the regime's broader strategy to showcase its military power. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
Over in the U.S., 2 staff members of the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. were shot and killed. The shooting happened on Wednesday night local time near the Capitol Jewish Museum. It was carried out by a 30-year-old man named Elias Rodriguez from Chicago. The victims, a young couple about to be engaged, were attending a Jewish event at the museum. The gunman yelled "Free Palestine" after he was arrested. U.S. President Donald Trump said horrible killings based on anti-Semitism must end and offered his condolences to the bereaved families on his social media platform. In the Middle East, trucks containing basic humanitarian aid has yet to reach Palestinians, while Israel ramps up its ground operations in Gaza. Lee Seung-jae covers growing humanitarian crisis in that region.
Work is in full swing to transport relief supplies to Gaza, but aid has still not been distributed to those in need. Around 100 relief trucks have passed through the Palestinian side of the Kerem Shalom checkpoint, with the first of the trucks to arrive there for a 3rd day. The delay comes amid concerns of looting, as authorities look to secure a safe route for the trucks.
So far, and this is as a few minutes ago, but the situation obviously is fluid, none of the supplies have been able to leave the Kerem Shalom loading area. This is because by yesterday evening, Israeli authorities had only allowed our teams to go through one area where that was highly congested, that we felt was insecure, and where we felt looting was highly likely to take place given the prolonged deprivation of in Gaza given since the blockade by the Israeli authorities for over 11 weeks.
UN officials are consulting with Israeli authorities to determine if another route can be used to deliver the aid. According to UN spokesperson Stefan Dujarric, humanitarian items include baby food, flour, medicine, and nutrition supplies. However, he said that Israel has not allowed hygiene products or fuel into Gaza. Meanwhile, the Israeli military has continued its ground operations in Gaza. According to Al Jazeera, around 80 people were killed in airstrikes in various locations in Gaza on Wednesday. In a press conference on the same day, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that Israeli military had apparently killed Hamas leader Mohammed Sinwar. He is the younger brother of Hamas former top leader Yahya Sinwar, who was killed in October last year. Netanyahu said that there are currently 20 Israeli hostages alive in Gaza and promised to bring them all back. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
In other news, Korea's defense companies, though smaller in scale, are presenting ambitious strategic solutions to bolstering security, from digital aircraft twins to anti-drone systems, at an ongoing regional showcase in Malaysia. Our defense correspondent Kim Bo-kyung has this report.
A Boeing 737's three-dimensional landing gear appears just by wearing a mixed reality headset. This is one of many innovative products Korea's small and medium-sized companies have brought to the Langkawi International Maritime and Aerospace Exhibition, Southeast Asia's largest exhibition of this type. Situated within the booth of the Integrated Korean Pavilion, Augmented Knowledge offers a digital twin of aircraft by integrating AI-based paper manuals with 3D models. Currently being used by several institutions, the cloud service is already helping students learn aircraft maintenance more efficiently. With the innovation that makes paper manuals a legacy of the past, the company aims to open up new opportunities at LIMA 2025.
Malaysia offers relatively low labour costs and has a well-developed MRO industry. We're in contact with both companies like GE Aerospace and local schools, aiming to establish a foothold in Southeast Asia.
Optical communications company Fostec, which is showcasing expanded beam connectors that are reliable for field use, is already producing cables used for Korean missile defense systems like Cheonggung. It now aims to explore more chances in the global market.
Our products are about 1/5 the cost compared to Amphenol and Glenair, with delivery times reduced by about half, while maintaining equal or superior quality standards.
Also eyeing the Southeast Asian market is an anti-drone manufacturer, producing a system that integrates multiple functions into one. It can detect, operate jamming methods, disrupt the signals and spoofing, and send false GPS signals to mislead the drone to move to a different direction.
I've heard that many key officials from important agencies such as the Malaysian Air Force and police will be attending, so we hope there will be an opportunity to participate in bids with the Malaysian government.
With strong government support behind them, Korean defense SMEs are taking a big leap into the global market. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News, Langkawi.
The summer-like heat has slowly eased off a bit. Yesterday was the hottest this year, with the daytime temperature exceeding 30 degrees Celsius in Seoul. It was still hot today, with highs of 27 degrees in Seoul, but not as hot as yesterday. Temperatures will stay slightly below the average both tomorrow and Saturday. Some rain will fall in southern regions today. It will rain around 5 millimeters in Gyeongsangnam-do Province and 5 to 10 millimeters mainly in the southern areas. Most of this rain will stop by tonight. More light rain is forecast on the west coast of Gyeongsangnam-do Province at dawn tomorrow and on Jeju Island from late afternoon. Tomorrow morning, Seoul, Gwangju, Jeju will start off at 16 degrees, Daejeon and Busan at 15 degrees. Daily highs will move up to 23 degrees in Seoul, 22 degrees in Chuncheon and Daegu. On Sunday, temperatures will rise back again. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
that is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. Tomorrow, Newscenter will be coming to you live at an hour earlier at 7 p.m. Korea time. A live televised presidential debate will be aired at 8 p.m. on Arirang. Have a great evening.
Travel creates new experiences and unforgettable memories. Through landscapes, food, scents, and textures, it awakens and satisfies our senses. The endless joy and inspiration of traveling.
제21대 대통령 재외선거.
세계 어느 곳에 있어도
내가 국가대표라는 마음으로
누구보다 땀 흘리죠. 지금이 국가대표임을
보여줄 기회.
대한민국 국민의 권리.
대한민국 국민의 의무.
반드시
투표합니다. 국가를 위한 대통령 투표. 제21대 대통령 재외선거. 중앙선거관리위원회.
Time to set the facts straight. Get Korea right. K-culture is sweeping the globe. K-pop, K-drama, K-movie, K-food, and even K-beauty. Korean cultural content is gaining more and more fans worldwide. It's indeed the golden age of K-culture. But with this growing interest comes an increase in misinformation about Korea. There's so much inaccurate information out there. Even AI can sometimes get it wrong. So, we must set things straight and correct all the misinformation. So here's the plan. The Voluntary Agency Network of Korea, VANK, and Arirang TV present the Get Korea Right project. Our goal is to provide accurate information on important keywords that come to mind when we think of Korea. Blatant errors and false claims that distort history. It's time to set the record straight, sharing the true history and culture of Korea while raising the national brand. Let's get started with Get Korea Right. Are you ready to join?
Welcome to the globalists. Welcome to the globalists. Welcome to the globalists. We're in a new set, a brand new set.
I am a globalist. And I'm the globalist.
And I'm the globalist who wants to bring jang right into your kitchen.
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most up-to-date issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gen. With less than 2 weeks until South Korea's June 3rd presidential election, overseas voters are poised to play a critical role. Ballots are being cast in 223 locations across 118 countries worldwide, with over 258,000 Koreans registering to cast their votes. Now, this is a significant jump compared to the last election, despite the fact that this year's overseas voting process had the shortest preparation window since its inception. And with compressed timelines, logistical challenges, and major policy stakes in play, the overseas vote is proving to be far more than symbolic. Today, we examine what's truly at stake, not just for Koreans at home, but also for the global electorate that's ready to be heard. For this, we are joined in the studio by Hans Shadow, Professor of Political Science at Yonsei University with us. Welcome, Professor.
Hi, Mo-gen. Nice to see you.
Great to see you, too. And also joining us online is Daniel Han, councillor for the City of Ryde in Sydney, and an active leader in Australia's Korean community as well. Great to see you.
Hello, thanks for having me again.
Thank you for joining us. Let's begin our discussion with Professor Shadow. So this overseas voter registration, I said it reached 258,000, more than 258,200 this year, which is a 14.2% jump from the last presidential election. Could you tell us how significant is this figure in terms of electoral impact, specifically given that the last presidential race was decided by just, 240,000 votes?
That's right, Mo-gen. And the last presidential election, of course, was remarkably close, basically less than a percentage point. So I suppose it's not very likely that this time around the two candidates will end up with that narrow a margin, but you never know. It ain't over until it's over. And one pattern that we have seen since overseas voting began for Korea with the 2012 presidential election is that the voters who participate generally lean a little bit more toward the Democratic Party than the Conservative Party. So if we go back to 2012, the overseas voters rewarded Moon Jae-in that time around. He had, I believe, about 56% of the vote. And in 2022, when it was Jae-myung against Jun-seok, Lee had 59% of the vote, and Yoon only had 36%. So it was a closer result in 2022 because the overseas voters were participating. Without those overseas voters, Yoon would have won by a wider margin. So now we have more overseas voters participating. Again, past behavior doesn't necessarily predict the future here, but it would suggest that these voters will also lean somewhat in the direction of the DP. And again, even though we have 10 days before the election, the polls show Jae-myung still with a fairly sizable lead. That lead is narrowing. And if the lead continues to narrow going into the election day, the overseas voters could be all the more important. So they could end up, figuring in one way or the other to how we analyze the outcome in a little over 10 days.
Right. So it seems like it's not really a small number considering the circumstances. Let's also bring in Councillor Han to the discussion too. So, Councillor, since you're in Sydney right now, could you tell us what does the current voting atmosphere look like in Australia, and what's your prediction for voter turnout among Koreans in this election?
Well, I think Korean Australians in Sydney are more engaged than ever in this year's election. There are a couple of reasons to this, I think. The lead up to this election, there's been a series of events that really grabbed everyone's attention around the world, especially all of the Koreans around the world has been following the saga very closely. And secondly, for Australia, we've just had our own federal election, which is equivalent to the presidential election in Korea. So politics, wherever you go, whether you're in the Korean politics or whether you're talking about Australian politics, it's been the hot topic of the town, whether it's from workplace to any dinner parties. And that's why I'm expecting a very strong voter turnout in general, but also in Australia.
Right, so a lot of attention is focused on this coming elections. Now, Councillor, we've heard that you lived in Australia since middle school and you served the community as a pharmacist, a teacher, and now an elected official. Given these experiences, do you think there's something very specific about the local culture or context in Australia that encourages such consistency in higher vote turnout among Korean residents?
Yes, Australia is a very unique country. Now, Australia has one of the highest voter turnouts in the world. To put it into context, we average around 90% or 90 or above participation rate, compared to the US or Korea, where they sit around 60 to 70%. Now, this political atmosphere may have an effect on the Korean voters in Australia. And there is a reason for such high voter turnout in Australia, because voting is actually compulsory here. So there are only a handful of countries around the world that promote compulsory voting, but we go the extra mile to actually enforce this. So, which means if you don't vote or if you forget to vote, you get fined. You get fined between about $50 US to about $100 US. Now, it's debatable whether enforcing people to vote and penalising them is impinging on their freedom of their rights. But I think this way, being able to participate in voting, I think it's an important right as a citizen, but it comes with a very important responsibility that shapes the future of a nation. So enforcing, I think this is probably the best democracy, I think, and I'm a big fan of Australian electoral system, and I'm very proud of it as well. I'd like to introduce one more very unique characteristic that is different to the Korean electoral system. We have what you call preferential voting system. This means on the ballot paper, you don't just choose one candidate, you actually rank them. You rank them the way you like them. So your top choice, if your top choice doesn't win, your votes will still count towards your next preference. So your voting intention is never wasted. And this actually, I think it empowers people. So if you put it into the current Korean situation, Korean election situation at the moment, there's been many talks of 단일화, the merger of parties, right? And I just heard Jun-seok rejected the merger. Now, people don't really have a say in the mergers, really, but using this preferential system, each individual decides who they would prefer, and if their candidate doesn't make it, so hypothetically, if I am a Jun-seok voter, right, I vote Jun-seok, and then for my second preference, I can put one of the other candidates. And if Jun-seok doesn't make it, my vote goes to either Jae-myung or Moon-soo, and that adds to their votes. And interestingly, this way, at the end of the election, you actually get to know how many of Jun-seok's votes go to Jae-myung, or how many goes to Moon-soo. So that's a very interesting data politically, if you that you can find out if you have this system. So it's very interesting. Maybe when the time comes for Korea to discuss electoral system reform, they could have a good look at our system here.
Wow, so it's really interesting. So making it mandatory to vote and having a preferential voting system could really help look into, who they really vote for and who they really prefer, actually. So it would be definitely helpful and helping them exercise their right to vote. Now, Professor Shuttle, how has this overseas voting historically influenced the outcome of the presidential elections in general? Are there any specific instances where, this overseas vote played a decisive or a symbolic role?
Well, it came pretty close in 2022, as we discussed just a moment ago. Less so in 2017 when Moon Jae-in won overwhelmingly. That time around, the overseas vote was pretty much in line with the country as a whole. And then in, of course, 2012, which was the first time of the overseas voting, Park Geun-hye won despite the overseas voting favoring Moon. But, you know, picking up on what Mayor Han was just saying about ranked choice voting, I thoroughly agree. And I think there's some relevance here for overseas voters, too. First of all, ranked choice, if and when Korea ever does talk about electoral reform, it does provide some refinement and gives voters who choose the candidates who initially get ruled out another way of still influencing the election after those first choices lose. Overseas voters in particular, right now, are expressing frustration that if they vote for the minority party candidates, those votes become wasted if they don't win. In fact, Jun-seok, for instance, I've read some news coverage where voters in Germany, I believe, who would consider voting for him are not voting for him because they worry that if he were to drop out, then that vote gets eliminated and it's a wasted vote. Whereas if you have ranked choice, then you vote for that person, he loses, while you still have the second choice going into play. And for overseas voters that are showing up several days before the election, the possibility that the person that they vote for will drop out is not hypothetical. It could really happen. Unlike some other countries that sometimes will have the overseas voting on the day of the election, Korea has it over a period of days, but it's in advance of the actual election day. So voters have to go in and they have to guess whether or not, if they support a minority candidate, whether that candidate will still be in the picture when the final election day comes in. And ranked choice would soften that calculation a little bit if we had it.
Right, so it would be definitely helpful, especially in this current situation where we're expecting or not expecting a merger. Now, this election had the shortest preparation period for overseas voting since the system's introduction, because it's a snap election, of course. Have logistical preparations for this short notice overseas election presented any specific challenges for Korean voters in Australia? Councillor Han?
This time around, we're not facing any major issues. I remember the last time when we had last Korean election here, it fell during the public holiday period in Australia. So that made it tough for some people who had travel plans and who couldn't vote away from the city. But this time around, the timing is much better. I think more people are ready to exercise their democratic rights of the politics that they've been following very closely. So I'm expecting one of the highest overseas voter turnouts in Australia and around the world.
Right, it's quite impressive, to see, even though this short timeline, people are still like working and struggling and making efforts to cast their ballots, like we've been seeing in the news lately. Now, what about Professor Shuttle in general? Then, what kind of challenges or vulnerabilities might this short preparatory time present in terms of transparency or voter access or even security?
Well, as we were saying earlier, there are a couple of hundred Korean embassies and consulates around the world that have to get their houses in order to accommodate the overseas voters coming in. And I've actually seen the process up close. During the 2022 presidential election, a couple of weeks before that took place, I was actually back home in Boston, and I happened to go to the Korean consulate to sort out a visa. And turned out they were having the early overseas voting at that moment in time. Consulate was full of people coming in to vote and having all their identification documents and papers ready. I would compare it more to early voting in the U.S. Many cities and towns in the U.S., especially since COVID, are now allowing voters to show up before the actual election day and cast their ballots. Really, the key is to make sure that you have the same sorts of transparent and secure procedures throughout the duration of the early voting that you would have on the election day itself. So it's very important for the voters to have proper identification, especially with overseas voting. That can involve bringing in passports and the like, or citizenship documents and ID cards and so forth. It's also, personally, I think it's important to have paper ballots. As I understand it, that's how the overseas voting works here. So if there's any need to recount or double check the veracity of votes, that those paper ballots are kept. The U.S. went through a period when I was growing up that they were using electronic voting machines and also just mechanical voting machines for a time. That gave way to paper ballots because of the concern about transparency and security. At this point, I think, I'm not witnessing the process firsthand, but the consulates, this is now their fourth presidential election with overseas voting, and I think there are pretty well standardized procedures in place. And as long as the individual offices stick to those procedures, then I think that can lend some confidence to the credibility of the overseas votes.
Now, let's step aside a little bit from voter turnout and move to policies. Councillor Han, what kind of policy expectations do overseas Koreans typically have, and how well are today's presidential candidates addressing these diaspora-specific issues?
Well, I haven't heard any particular policy regarding overseas Koreans from any candidates so far. But over the years, I've been speaking to many overseas Koreans, and at the heart of it all, I think what they really want is to be fully included and involved in shaping Korea's future, no matter where they live in the world. So two of the main points that I hear a lot from the communities is easy access to voting and even possibly having dedicated seats or representation in the Korean parliament for overseas Koreans. And another issue is the right to return and settle in Korea, like reverse immigration, with proper support like education and health. And I think this could be a key solution to the decreasing population in Korea because so many Koreans live abroad and they still identify themselves as Koreans. And if it is much easier, it becomes easier to return to Korea and resettle in Korea, I think it could be one of the solutions. We can't solve all the problems in the world, but we can talk about some ideas.
Let's hope those ideas could be really heard and put into action as well. Now, Councillor, you've mentioned that there was an Australian federal election held on May 3rd. And what kind of lessons do you think could be drawn from that election, especially regarding global political currents or political parallels to Korea's political climate?
Well, yes, our federal election here in Australia was a big moment. The coalition, which is our more conservative party, they've been leading the polls closer to the election, but then ended up losing, had a thumping, like losing. The other party had a landslide win. So, and the same thing I think happened in Canada last month. And I think one of the reasons or the factors was the growing uncertainty around the global economy made the voters very risk averse, and they didn't want anything to do with conservative parties or the right-wing parties. And the left have managed to capitalize the fear very well here, and people have responded with their ballot papers. So yes, as for the Korean election, the global political currents will be unavoidable, but I hope this election can be a chance to debate about real solutions, good policies, and a clear vision for the future, rather than a fear-driven smearing campaigns.
Right. Now, before we conclude our discussion tonight, Professor Shuttle, looking ahead to the election day, what do you think is ultimately at stake in this presidential election, not just for Koreans at home, but also for the millions of overseas Koreans watching and voting from abroad?
Right. I think number one might very well be the integrity of the country's constitutional democracy. You know, we cleared one phase with the Constitutional Court decision that removed former President Yoon from power, and I think many voters at home and especially overseas want to see the country clear the next hurdle with a smooth presidential election and a peaceful transfer of power to whomever might be the next president. I think there will also be a lot of concern going forward that the next president can maintain integrity while serving for the duration, that hopefully impeachment will not be needed again. The country's gone through 2 impeachments in the last 10 years, and I cannot say enough how much I think the public would like to avoid going through something like that again. And then, of course, there's a whole host of serious issues as well. Inequality, education, housing, affordability. These are issues that the 2 political parties are not necessarily so far apart on in their policies, yet they seem to find it difficulty to reach consensus as to where to take the country. And then you layer in all the geopolitical situations, the new president will have a lot to work with. Last thing I'll say is the overseas voters really pay attention. I was reading some testimony from some of them interviewed by reporters, particularly in Europe. People are watching the debates. There's been one debate so far that got a lot of attention, and I saw quotes from voters saying that they were not satisfied with what the candidates were saying about the anti-discrimination law. And in fact, one voter, I think in particular, wanted to support candidate Kwon Young-guk, and because they thought he came across stronger on that particular issue. So the voters are paying attention to very specific and detailed issues that might not affect them directly, but might say a lot about the direction the country is taking, and it weighs into their choices.
So it's a reminder that vote isn't just about policy, it's also about direction as well.
For sure.
All right. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and for your insights tonight. Professor Shadow, thank you
for having me, Mo-kyun.
Thank you too. And Councillor Han, we appreciate your insights and your time tonight.
Thank you.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.